The real daily life of a Viking. Welcome back to Dark History, bedtime tales where we tuck you in with stories no one asked for, but now you can't stop listening to. If you're new here, dim your lights, get comfortable, and prepare to be transported to a time when comfort was a luxury no one could afford. Tonight we're going back to the Viking Age. Not to the glamorous halls of gods and heroes that Hollywood has sold you. No, we're going to experience the real, unfiltered life of an ordinary Norse person. The kind your history books glossed over because their lives were too mundane, too smelly, and far too real. Like and subscribe if you've ever wondered what it would be like to wake up in a body that hasn't bathed properly since last summer. Comment below if you think you could survive a single day in the early Middle Ages without crying for your smartphone and antibiotics. Close your eyes. Let the warmth of your modern home fade away. Feel the biting cold creep into your bones, the smell of smoke, unwashed bodies, and fermented fish fills your nostrils. You are no longer you. You are a Viking now. Not the kind that raids distant shores with a gleaming axe. Not the kind that drinks from the skulls of enemies and dies gloriously in battle. No, you're just a regular person, an average Norse farmer or craftsperson who will probably never see the shores of England or taste the spoils of raiding. You're just trying to survive another day in the harsh northern lands during the 9th century. And that day begins now. Part 1. Awakening to Darkness. The first thing you notice isn't light. It's the absence of it. Your eyes open to darkness so complete it feels like a physical weight pressing against your face. It's winter in Scandinavia, where darkness isn't just a time of day. It's a season, a way of life. Imagine the sound of your alarm clock. Now replace it with the howling of bitter wind finding every crack in your timber and sod house, and the grunt of livestock who share your living space because it's too cold to keep them outside. There's no snooze button in the Viking Age. The animals need feeding, the fire needs stoking, and if you don't get up, you might just freeze to death before breakfast. Oh, and speaking of breakfast, forget it. The concept of breakfast as a proper meal won't exist for another 1,000 years. Like and subscribe if you're already missing your morning coffee and avocado toast. You're lying on what passes for a bed in the 9th century. A wooden frame filled with straw, perhaps some furs or woolen blankets if you're not destitute. Your back aches from the uneven surface that's been compressed by months of your body weight. That dull pain in your lower back, it's not going away. Ever. This is just your life now. What modern people treat with physical therapy and ergonomic mattresses, you'll be treating with resignation and mead until you die at the ripe old age of surprisingly made it to 40. The air inside your home, a long house if you're fortunate, a pit house if you're not, is thick with smoke. There's a central hearth that's been burning all night at a low smolder to keep everyone from freezing to death. The smoke is supposed to escape through a hole in the roof, but wind conditions aren't perfect, and now your living space is filled with the acrid cloud that will eventually give all Viking Age people that distinctive, smoky smell and chronic respiratory issues. Inhale deeply. That's the smell of history. Smoke, body odor, damp wool, and the earthy aroma of the animals that are your unwilling roommates. Modern historians and archaeologists don't often mention the olfactory experience of the past, but let me assure you, the Viking Age had a very distinct bouquet, and it wasn't lavender and vanilla. As your eyes adjust to the darkness, you make out the shapes of your family members. Perhaps a spouse, children if they've survived infancy, and that's a big if. Infant mortality rates hovered around 30%. Maybe elderly parents, if they've defied the odds. Everyone sleeps close together, not just for emotional comfort, but for the simple, practical warmth of shared body heat. Personal space is a luxury that won't be invented for several centuries. You've been asleep on a bench along the wall if you're lucky, or perhaps right on the floor near the hearth if you're not. Many Viking-age homes had box beds, enclosed wooden sleeping platforms that helped retain heat, but they were often reserved for the head of the household or important guests. You, being just an average Norse person, likely made do with whatever sleeping arrangement was available. The air is cold, bone-chillingly, breath-visibly cold. The fire has died down overnight, and even though your home is designed to retain heat with its thick walls and small windows, if any, the Scandinavian winter is relentless. The inside temperature might be just above freezing, a balmy 35 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the bitter 10 outside. Like and subscribe if you think your fancy North Face jacket would save you here. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't. That's your cue. No matter how much your joints ache, no matter how exhausted, you still feel from yesterday's labor it's time to rise. The animals need tending, the fire needs feeding, and your family needs to survive another day in this harsh northern landscape. You swing your legs over the edge of your sleeping platform, and your bare feet touch the packed earth floor. It's like stepping onto a block of ice. The cold shoots up through your feet, into your legs, and seems to settle into your very bones. This is why many Norse people slept in at least some of their clothes, and why they didn't often fully undress for bed. In fact, the word nightgown would have been meaningless to you. Sleep clothes are just your day clothes minus a layer or two. Since you live in a one-room dwelling, or perhaps a longhouse with minimal partitioning, privacy doesn't exist in the way modern people understand it. You relieve yourself either in a designated corner with some kind of primitive waste collection, directly outside in a pit toilet, or, if it's too cold, in a bucket that will need to be emptied later. There's no shame in this, everyone does it, often within earshot of everyone else. The concept of bathroom privacy is still 1,000 years away. Your body aches as you stand fully upright. At the ripe old age of whatever you are, and if you're over 30, you're already defying some odds, your body bears the marks of a hard life. Perhaps it's a back permanently curved from field work, or fingers that no longer straighten completely from years of craft work. Maybe it's a knee that predicts storms better than any shaman, or teeth worn down from chewing tough food and using them as a third hand for tasks modern people would use tools for. Speaking of teeth, run your tongue over them. Feel how they're worn down, how some might be missing entirely. Dental hygiene isn't completely unknown in the Viking Age. You might use frayed twigs as a primitive toothbrush, rinse with water, or even use primitive toothpicks. Archaeological evidence shows that some Norse people did attempt to clean their teeth, but without effective methods of fighting bacteria, cavities and gum disease are just facts of life. That dull ache in your jaw? That's just your daily companion until the tooth either falls out or becomes so painful that it needs to be pulled without anesthesia. Sweet dreams about that tonight. Your first task of the day is rekindling the fire. No matches, no lighters. You'll use an ember box, a container kept by the hearth that holds smouldering embers from last night's fire, or strike sparks using flint and steel if the embers have died. This is a skill you learned as a child because fire isn't just comfort, it's life itself during the Scandinavian winter. As the flames grow, they cast flickering shadows across the walls of your home. If you're in a traditional longhouse, the center of the structure has a long hearth with smoke rising to escape through a hole in the roof. The light reveals the simple but functional interior. Wooden benches along the walls that serve as seating during the day and beds at night. Hooks and shelves holding everyday items, perhaps loom weights and spindles for textile work. Eating utensils made of wood, horn, or bone. Iron tools hanging from posts, and storage containers made of wood, ceramic, or woven materials. The walls might be decorated with simple tapestries or woven hangings, not just for aesthetic purposes, but for the practical benefit of insulation. These aren't the elaborate scenes of gods and heroes you might imagine. Those would be found only in the halls of chieftains and jarls. Your decorations, if you have them, are simpler geometric patterns, perhaps dyed in whatever colours were available locally. Yellows from weld, reds from madder, blues from woad if you're lucky enough to have access to it. As the fire grows stronger, other members of your household begin to stir. Children whimper at being woken from precious sleep. Your spouse mumbles something that might be the Viking age equivalent of 5 more minutes. And the animals in your home, perhaps goats or a cow, if you're fortunate enough to own livestock, begin to make their hunger known. There's no leisurely transition from sleep to wakefulness in this world. No scrolling through your phone, no coffee machine gurgling in the background. The moment your eyes open, the work of survival begins, and your stomach is already growling. Part 2. Breaking the Fast. The fire is now crackling properly, offering blessed warmth against the biting cold. Your family members are rising, each person knowing their morning duties without discussion. This choreography of survival has been performed every day of your lives, a dance of necessity where everyone must play their part. What modern people call breakfast isn't really a concept in your world. The word itself, breaking the fast of night, won't become common for centuries. Instead, you'll likely have a simple morning meal that barely deserves the name. Perhaps a piece of hardened bread left from yesterday, softened by dipping it in whey. Maybe some skyer, a yogurt-like dairy product that's been a staple in Norse diet for generations. If times are good, there might be some dried fruit or nuts. If times are hard, which they often are in winter, it might just be a thin gruel made from whatever grain is available. Listen to that sound, the scraping of a wooden spoon against a wooden bowl. It's the soundtrack of sustenance, not culinary delight. You're not eating for pleasure, you're fueling your body for the work ahead. And trust me, there's plenty of work ahead. The food is simple but filling. The bread is dense and dark, nothing like the fluffy white stuff modern people eat. It's made from barley or rye, often with added peas, beans, or even tree bark in times of scarcity. It's so hard you might need to soften it in liquid before eating, and it contains small bits of millstone that gradually wear down your teeth over the course of your life. That distinctive click you sometimes hear when chewing? That's stone meeting tooth enamel, a sound that would make modern dentists shudder. Your morning drink isn't coffee or orange juice. Depending on your status and the season, it might be water, whey, buttermilk, or thin ale. Yes, ale for breakfast, not because Vikings were perpetual partiers, but because the fermentation process made the water safer to drink. The ale of the morning is weaker than what might be consumed during feasts, with perhaps 2-3% alcohol content, just enough to kill some harmful bacteria, but not enough to impair your work. Children drink it too. Everyone drinks it because water sources can be contaminated, and no one understands germ theory yet. As you eat, you take stock of your surroundings in the growing firelight. Your home is not the grand mead hall of sagas. For most ordinary Norse folk, home is a simple structure designed for function over comfort. If you're a farmer of modest means, you likely live in a longhouse, a rectangular building with bowed walls, a thatched, or turf roof, and walls made of timber, wattle and daub, or stone depending on local resources. The building might be 50-75 feet long and 15-20 feet wide, with the central area dominated by the long hearth. Your home is likely a single room, though some longhouses had partial partitions, creating separate areas for sleeping, storage, or specialized work. If you're of lower status, you might live in a pit house, a semi-subterranean dwelling dug partially into the ground with a simple roof structure above. These were easier to heat but darker and often smoky. The most distinctive feature of your home compared to modern dwellings is its openness to the elements. Despite best efforts at insulation, drafts are constant companions. The smoke hole that allows the hearth fire to vent also allows in snow and rain. Small windows, if you have them at all, might be covered with oiled animal membrane instead of glass, providing minimal light and poor insulation. Your home is also not exclusively human territory. Depending on your status and the season, you might share your living space with livestock, particularly in winter when animals need protection from the elements. The body heat of a cow or a few goats can make a meaningful difference in the indoor temperature during the coldest months. The arrangement has mutual benefits, but comes with the obvious drawbacks of smell, noise, and hygiene challenges. And speaking of hygiene, take a moment to smell yourself. That's not morning breath, that's your permanent aroma. Daily bathing, as we understand it today, is not part of your routine. Despite popular misconceptions that Norse people were uniquely filthy, they actually practiced more regular hygiene than many of their European contemporaries. But that's not saying much. You might wash your face and hands daily with cold water, but a full-body wash is a weekly affair at best, often in the form of a communal trip to a nearby stream or lake in warmer months. In winter, it might be a quick wipe down with a damp cloth, if that. During the coldest months, you might go several weeks without anything we'd recognize as proper bathing. If you're thinking gross, just remember, everyone smells bad, so no one notices. It's only gross by modern standards. Like and subscribe if you've ever gone camping and discovered your own authentic medieval aroma by day 3. However, this doesn't mean hygiene is completely ignored. Archaeological evidence shows that Norse people used primitive combs, ear spoons, early ear cleaners, and even primitive toothpicks. Grooming was important, particularly for hair and beards. That image of filthy, matted-haired Vikings is largely a Hollywood invention. Your hair might be greasy by modern standards, but it would be combed and possibly braided, especially if you're a woman. Speaking of women, if you're female in this scenario, you have additional mourning concerns. Menstruation is handled with wool or linen cloths that must be washed and reused. Pregnancy is both common and dangerous. Childbirth is a leading cause of death for women, with approximately 1 in 5 women dying from pregnancy-related complications during their reproductive years. This morning, like every morning, you might take a moment to touch the amulet of Frigg or Freya at your neck, goddesses associated with fertility and childbirth, and whisper a prayer for protection. As the weak winter sun finally begins to lighten, the smoke hole, a pale grey rather than true daylight, it's time to dress for the day ahead. Your clothing isn't selected for fashion, but for survival. Layers are essential. Next to your skin, you wear a linen under-tunic if you're wealthy enough to afford linen, or a wool one if you're not. This might be the same garment you slept in. Over this goes a woolen tunic that reaches to your knees if you're a man, or a longer woolen dress if you're a woman. Your legs are covered with fitted trousers if you're a man, or perhaps just woolen leg wrappings wound around your calves. Women might wear a kind of underdress beneath their main dress. Both men and women wear woolen socks and leather shoes. Simple turn shoe construction with the seams on the inside to keep out water and snow. These aren't the thick-soled shoes modern people wear. They're essentially leather bags for your feet, offering protection from sharp objects but little comfort or support. Over everything goes a cloak fastened at the shoulder with a brooch, if you're fortunate enough to have one. The brooch isn't just decorative, it's one of your most valuable possessions, perhaps made of bronze or even silver if you have some wealth. It might be one of the few items you own that isn't strictly utilitarian. Your clothing is not the bright, clean garments depicted in modern Viking shows. The wool is scratchy against your skin, and everything smells of smoke, sweat, and the oils used to help waterproof the fabric. The colors are muted, undyed wool's natural shadings of brown, grey, and cream predominate, with perhaps some plant-dyed threads in yellow, red, or blue woven in as simple decoration if you're of sufficient status. There's no elastic, no zippers, no buttons as we know them. Clothing is fastened with pins, brooches, or simple toggles. Everything is handmade, either by members of your household or bartered from someone with greater skill at textile production. Nothing is wasted. Garments are patched and repatched until they're finally too worn to wear, at which point they become rags for other purposes. Like and subscribe if you've ever tried to mend your own clothes and gained a new appreciation for how much work goes into keeping yourself covered. Now imagine doing that for your entire family by hand with thread you spun yourself. As you secure your belt, perhaps a simple band of leather or a length of tablet-woven wool if you're more prosperous, you tuck your eating knife into its sheath. This is not a weapon, but a tool you use for everything from eating to woodworking to everyday cutting tasks. You've had it for years, perhaps inherited it from a parent, and its handle is smooth from generations of use. You might also secure other small items to your belt, or place them in a simple pouch, a fire striker, a small whetstone for keeping your knife sharp, perhaps a comb made of bone or wood. These are your everyday carry item, the Viking equivalent of your phone, wallet, and keys. Now dressed and having consumed your meager morning meal, you're ready to step outside and face the day's labor. But before you do, you pause at the doorway and touch the carved symbol above it, perhaps Thor's hammer for protection, or a simple rune invoking good fortune. The old gods and the old ways still hold sway in your daily life, despite the Christian influences slowly creeping into Norse culture. This simple gesture is both prayer and habit, a moment of connection with forces greater than yourself before facing the harsh realities outside. You push open the door, and the cold hits you like a physical blow. The breath freezes in your lungs for a moment before you adjust. The wan winter sunlight does little to warm the landscape, but at least it pushes back the oppressive darkness that dominates these northern winters. Time to begin the real work of the day. Part 3: Morning Labours. The cold air slaps your face like an angry god. Your breath comes out in thick clouds that momentarily obscure your vision. The snow beneath your leather shoes crunches with each step, a sound so crisp it seems almost loud in the winter stillness. Imagine that sound now, the crunch of frozen earth and snow under your feet, the squeak of compacted snow that only happens in the deepest cold. These are the sounds of winter in the north, sounds your ancestors knew intimately. The first task of every morning is tending to the animals, your most valuable possessions. Livestock in the Viking Age isn't just wealth, it's survival. Each animal represents food, clothing materials, tools, and status. The death of a milk cow could mean genuine hardship for your entire family. If you're fortunate enough to have a barn, you make your way to it now. If not, you're caring for the animals that shared your living space overnight. Either way, there's feeding, watering, and mucking out to be done. The animals don't care that it's freezing, that your fingers are already numb, or that the water bucket keeps icing over. They need care every single day without exception. The animals you tend depend on your status and region. You likely have at least a few goats prized for their milk and meat. If you're more prosperous, you might have a cow or two, sheep for wool, perhaps chickens for eggs. Pigs are common, often allowed to forage in the woods during warmer months, but kept closer in winter. And horses, not the massive war steeds of legend, but smaller, hardier animals used primarily for transportation and farm work, are marks of significant status. As you fork over hay or grain, collected and stored, during the brief summer months, you speak softly to the animals. This isn't sentimentality, it's practicality. Calm animals are easier to handle, and in this harsh climate, you need all the cooperation you can get. Besides, these creatures are your partners in survival. They provide food, materials, labor, and even companionship in a world where life is continuously precarious. The animal care itself is straightforward but physically demanding. The hay is heavy, the water bucket's heavier still, as you break ice from the surface of the nearby stream or well. Mucking out frozen animal waste requires strength and endurance. By the time you finish this first task of the day, you're already physically taxed, your back aching, your hands raw from cold and work, but there's no time to rest. The day has barely begun, and there are hours of labor ahead. If you're a man, your next task might be wood cutting, a never-ending chore in the cold north. Fire is life, and fire demands a constant supply of fuel. Using an iron axe, one of your most valuable tools, you split logs that were cut during the warmer months and have been seasoning. The rhythmic chunk of the axe blade sinking into wood is another sound that defines your existence. Each stroke requires not just strength, but precision. An errant swing could mean an injury that, in this world without antibiotics or modern medicine, might prove fatal. As you work, the physical effort finally brings some warmth to your body. Sweat begins to form under your layers of wool and linen despite the cold air. This is dangerous. If you stop moving, that moisture will quickly turn icy against your skin, potentially leading to illness. If you're a woman, your morning might be devoted to food preparation and textile work. These aren't lesser tasks. They're equally essential for survival and require significant skill and strength. Grinding grain into flour using a hand quern is exhausting work, the stone wheel heavy as you turn it repeatedly to create the coarse flour needed for bread. Your shoulders and back burn with the effort, and the monotony of the task is broken only by the rhythmic scraping of stone against stone. That sound, gritty and persistent, is the sound of transforming raw ingredients into survival. The flour you produce will contain small stone fragments from the quern, which will gradually wear down the teeth of everyone who eats the resulting bread. This is just one of many small cumulative hardships that will age your body far beyond your years. Gender roles in Norse society were more flexible than in many other contemporary cultures, but there were still typical divisions of labor. Women managed the household economy, which was far from a minor role. They controlled food stores, textile production, dairy processing, and beer brewing, all crucial aspects of survival and wealth. Men typically handled hunting, most construction, deep-sea fishing, and crafts like metalworking. But these weren't rigid boundaries. Necessity often dictated who did what work, and many tasks were shared. By mid-morning, you've already been awake and working for hours, with only that meager first meal to sustain you. Your stomach growls, but there's no concept of a mid-morning snack break. You might grab a piece of dried fish or a handful of nuts as you work, eating on the move because daylight is precious. especially in winter when there are barely a few hours of weak sunlight. The work continues relentlessly. If you're a farmer, winter is actually a less frantic time than the growing season, but it brings its own challenges. There are tools to repair, items to craft, and preparations to make for spring. If you're a craftsperson, perhaps a blacksmith, woodworker, or potter, your work is somewhat sheltered from the elements but no less demanding. Let's say you're a blacksmith, one of the most respected crafts in Norse society. Your morning is spent at the forge, working with tools that have changed little from your grandfather's time. The bellows wheeze as you or an apprentice pumps them, building the heat needed to make metal workable. Sparks fly as you hammer hot iron into nails, hinges, knife blades, or tools, all essential items for your community. The forge provides welcome heat against the winter cold, but the work is grueling. Each hammer blow must be precise, and mistakes can mean wasted material or dangerous defects in the finished product. Your arms ache from the repetitive motion, and tiny burns dot your hands and arms, so common you barely notice new ones anymore. If you're a woman skilled in textile production, another highly valued craft, you might spend your morning at the loom. The creation of fabric isn't just a domestic task, it's a critical industry. A single woolen sail for a Viking ship could require a year's worth of work from several women. The cloth for everyday clothing, bedding, and other household necessities all comes from skilled hands, working with spindle and loom. The work requires not just dexterity but strength. The warp-weighted loom used in the Viking Age stands upright against a wall, with clay or stone weights creating tension on the threads. Hour after hour, you pass the shuttle through, beat the weft threads into place, and gradually create fabric that will eventually be cut and sewn into garments. Your back aches from standing, your eyes strain in the dim light filtering through the smoke hole, and your fingers are rough and cracked from constant work with wool and flax. For children, there's no concept of play as the primary childhood activity. From the moment they can walk steadily, children are incorporated into the household labor system with tasks appropriate to their age and strength. A 5-year-old might be responsible for collecting eggs or feeding chickens. A 10-year-old boy might help with animal care or learn craft skills from his father or master. A girl of similar age would be deeply involved in household tasks, already proficient in skills like spinning thread and basic cooking. Education doesn't happen in schools but through direct apprenticeship in life skills. A father teaches his son to hunt, fish, and farm. A mother teaches her daughter the complex mathematics of weaving patterns and the chemistry of dyeing cloth. Children learn by doing, by watching, by making mistakes and being corrected. Formal literacy is rare. The runic alphabet is known primarily to those who need it for trade, religious purposes, or the recording of property and lineage as the weak winter sun reaches its zenith, not high in the sky, but barely clearing the horizon in these northern latitudes. It's time for the main meal of the day. Part 4, the midday meal. The midday meal is the principal food event in your Viking Age day. Modern people might think of Vikings feasting at night on roasted meats and flowing mead, but for ordinary folk, the main meal comes in the middle of the day when there's still light to see by and when the body most needs sustenance for work. You return to your dwelling, perhaps with family members or fellow workers if you're part of a larger household. The central hearth fire has been maintained throughout the morning, likely by an elderly family member or older child whose responsibilities keep them closer to home. Above the fire hangs an iron cooking pot, one of your household's most valuable possessions, suspended by chains or sitting on an iron trivet over the flames. What's in the pot? not the massive haunches of meat depicted in Viking films. For ordinary people, meat is a precious commodity, eaten regularly but in small amounts, often as flavoring rather than the main component of a meal. Today's pot likely contains a stew or soup, the most efficient way to feed a family with limited resources. The stew might contain barley or oats as the base, root vegetables like turnips, carrots, or rutabagas, foraged greens when in seasons, not in winter, small amounts of preserved meat, perhaps salt pork or dried fish. Herbs both for flavour and medicinal properties, dill, thyme, and mustard are common. Perhaps seaweed near coastal areas, an important source of iodine and minerals. The key resulting meal is nutritious if monotonous. It's designed to fill bellies and provide energy, not to delight the palate. The concept of cuisine, as we understand it, is foreign to your Viking Age existence. You eat what's available, what's preserved, what will keep you alive. Bread accompanies. The stew, that same dense, heavy bread mentioned earlier. You might dip it in the broth or use it as a makeshift plate for your portion of stew. There are no forks. You eat with a spoon carved from wood or horn, your personal knife, and your fingers. Table manners exist but are practical rather than formal, focused on avoiding waste and showing respect for the communal nature of the meal rather than arbitrary rules of etiquette. Listen to that sound. People eating heartily after a morning of physical labour. There's no quiet, polite dining here. Food is fuel, and refueling is serious business. Conversation happens, of course. This is a social time as much as a nutritional one, but it's secondary to the primary purpose of taking in enough calories to survive another half day of work. Your drink with the meal is likely ale, that same lightly alcoholic beverage mentioned earlier. Water is available but often suspect unless from a known clean spring. Milk is rarely drunk fresh by adults. It's too valuable for making longer-lasting dairy products. And wine is an imported luxury most ordinary Norse people would rarely, if ever, taste. The meal itself takes perhaps half an hour, a brief respite in a day otherwise devoted to constant labour. As you eat, you might discuss household matters, share news from neighbours, or plan the afternoon's work. Weather is a common topic, not small talk, but vital information that could determine activities and even survival in the coming days. If there are guests present, perhaps travellers or extended family, this meal is when news from other areas might be shared. In a world without mass communication, oral transmission is how information travels. A visitor might bring vital knowledge about everything from political developments to new agricultural techniques to reports of raiding opportunities on distant shores. As the meal concludes, nothing is wasted. Leftovers, if any, are carefully preserved for later consumption. Food scraps go to animals. Even the bones will be processed. Larger ones crafted into tools or decorative items, smaller ones boiled for broth. In a subsistence economy where every calorie is earned through hard labour, nothing edible is casually discarded. This sustainable waste-not approach wasn't based on environmental consciousness as we understand it today, but on pure necessity. Your survival depends on maximising every resource available to you. This is why archaeological excavations of Viking Age middens, trash heaps, reveal so little in the way of usable materials. Nearly everything was repurposed until it was, truly, completely exhausted of value. The empty wooden bowls are quickly wiped clean with a piece of bread, which is then eaten. They might get a rinse with water if available, but the concept of washing dishes as modern people understand it is mostly foreign. The natural oils from food help condition the wood and prevent cracking. Your bowl might have been used by your parent before you and, with care, will serve your children after you're gone. With the meal concluded and the brief rest it provided, It's time to return to the never-ending work of survival. The weak winter sun is already beginning its early descent toward the horizon. In the depths of the Scandinavian winter, daylight might last only 4 to 6 hours, and every moment of natural light is precious. Part 5. Afternoon tasks. The afternoon brings no respite from labor. If anything, the work intensifies as you race against the dying light. The temperature begins to drop as the sun moves lower, and you can feel the cold creeping deeper into your bones. Your morning meal is now just a memory, the calories already burned by your body's constant battle against the elements. What occupies your afternoon depends on your role in Norse society, the season, and immediate needs. Let's explore a few possibilities. If you're a farmer, which most Norse people were, winter afternoons might be devoted to repair work, mending tools, reinforcing structures, or crafting new implements for the coming spring. Perhaps today, you're working on a broken plough, carefully shaping a replacement part with a hand axe. Every item you use must be maintained, and most are made by your own hands or bartered from specialist crafters. Feel the weight of the axe in your hands, the shock of each impact traveling up your arms. Your fingers are stiff with cold despite your constant movement, and the short winter day means you're working as quickly as precision allows. The piece must fit exactly or the plough will fail when it's most needed in spring if you're engaged. In a craft, your afternoon continues much as your morning did, the constant, repetitive motions of your specialized work. Perhaps you're a potter. Your hands constantly wet and cold as you shape clay vessels vital for storage. Maybe you're a leather worker, your fingers pricked and stained from handling hides and sinew. Or you could be a woodworker, surrounded by sweet-smelling shavings as you craft everything from spoons to ship's planks. For women, afternoon often means continued textile work, an absolutely critical industry that is frequently underrepresented in popular Viking portrayals. The creation of cloth was a never-ending task that required multiple stages of processing. First, there's the preparation of fibers, combing wool or breaking and scutching flax to extract linen fibers. Then comes spinning, the magical transformation of loose fiber into usable thread using a drop spindle. The spinning wheel won't become common in Northern Europe for several more centuries. Next is weaving on the warp-weighted loom, followed by finishing processes like fulling for wool or beetling for linen. That repetitive sound is the beating of wool cloth to full it, shrinking and tightening the weave to create weather-resistant fabric. It's exhausting work, requiring strength and endurance. Your arms ache from the repeated motion, but the resulting cloth will keep your family warm through bitter nights. This isn't a hobby or a quaint, traditional craft. It's the production of an essential resource without which survival would be impossible. If you live near the coast, your afternoon might involve fishing, regardless of the season. The sea doesn't freeze entirely in many Norse coastal areas, and winter fishing, while dangerous, provides vital protein when other food sources are scarce. Imagine standing in a small boat or on the rocky shore, your hands nearly numb with cold as you work nets or lines. The risk of falling into the frigid water is ever present, and would likely mean death by hypothermia within minutes. For those with specialized roles, merchants, chieftains, retainers, religious specialists, winter afternoons might involve more social activities. A merchant might visit neighboring farms to negotiate spring trades. A warrior in a jarl's retinue might spend hours in weapons practice. A person with knowledge of runes might be called upon to create inscriptions or interpret signs. Children continue their work-based education, learning by doing rather than formal study. A boy of 12 might already be responsible for hunting small game or maintaining fish traps. A girl of the same age might supervise younger siblings, while processing wool or preserving food. There's no concept of childhood as a protected time of play and development. Children are small adults with responsibilities scaled to their capabilities, and they're expected to contribute to household survival from an early age. The afternoon wears on, and perhaps the weather changes. Snow begins to fall, not the picturesque, gentle flakes of holiday cards, but driving, horizontal pellets carried on a biting wind. There's no checking a weather app or calling off work for inclement conditions. You simply adjust, perhaps moving tasks indoors where possible, or donning an extra layer of wool and continuing outside if necessary. Weather in the Viking Age isn't just an inconvenience. It's a matter of life and death. A sudden storm could mean lost livestock, damaged structures, or personal injury. Modern people often romanticize living in harmony with nature, but there's nothing romantic about the reality. Nature is not your friend. It's a power to be respected, feared, and constantly guarded against. As the snow intensifies, you might make the decision to secure animals and move work indoors. The longhouse becomes a hive of activity, multiple family members engaged in the different tasks in the limited space. One person might be carving wooden items near the light of the smoke hole. Another might be processing animal hides in a corner. Children might be sorting through dried herbs or repairing fishing nets. The space is used efficiently with different activities assigned to specific areas. The interior of your home, which seemed oppressively smoky and dark this morning, now feels like blessed shelter as the storm rages outside. The central hearth provides not just warmth, but a psychological comfort, a literal and figurative heart of the household that has remained unchanged for generations. As the brief winter daylight fades to dusky twilight, new tasks emerge. Lamps must be lit. Simple clay vessels filled with fish oil or animal fat with rush or moss wicks. These provide minimal flickering light and add their own distinctive odor to the already complex olfactory landscape of your home. The light they cast is nothing like modern electric illumination. It's a small pool of dim yellowish light that barely lets you see your work. Many tasks simply become impossible after dark. That gentle sizzling is the sound of a rushlight being ignited, one of the humblest forms of illumination available in the Viking Age. It provides just enough light to avoid stumbling over objects, but little enough that detailed work becomes nearly impossible. Modern people, surrounded by artificial light that turns night into day, can hardly conceive of the profound darkness that was a normal part of life for your ancestors. As true darkness falls, the final major task of the day begins. The evening, meal, and preparations for night. Part 6. Evening, meal and nightfall. The evening meal is typically smaller than the midday one, both because resources are carefully managed and because heavy eating before sleep was considered unhealthy, a belief that modern nutritionists would actually support. It might consist of leftovers from midday, perhaps supplemented with bread, cheese, or dried fish. The family gathers around the central hearth, drawn by both hunger and the need for warmth and light, as the bitter cold of night settles over the landscape. This is the time for family bonds to be reinforced, for stories to be told, for the oral traditions that maintain your culture to be passed to the next generation. Unlike the midday meal, which is often hurried to allow return to work, the evening meal can be more leisurely, though still utterly lacking in modern concepts of comfort. You sit on wooden benches or stools, perhaps with furs for minimal cushioning, bodies weary from the day's constant labor. As you eat, older family members might begin to tell stories, not just for entertainment, but as a crucial method of cultural transmission. These aren't just any tales, but carefully preserved narratives that contain your people's history, ethics, religious beliefs, and practical knowledge. Perhaps tonight's story is about Thor's battle with the Midgard serpent, a tale that reinforces cultural values of strength and courage against overwhelming odds. Or it might be the story of a local ancestor who survived a particularly harsh winter through cleverness and foreknowledge, a narrative containing practical advice disguised as entertainment. And then Thor raised Mjolnir high, the lightning crackling around the mighty hammer as the serpent's jaws gaped wide enough to swallow the world. Listen to the cadence of the storyteller's voice, rising and falling, creating tension and release. This is education, entertainment, and religious instruction all in one, delivered in the most efficient way possible for a predominantly non-literate society. Children listen wide-eyed, absorbing not just the narrative but the values embedded within it. Adults hear the familiar tales with the comfort of tradition, occasionally adding details or asking questions that further illustrate important points. The religious worldview expressed in these stories is complex and practical. The Norse gods aren't distant, perfect beings, but flawed, relatable figures with their own strengths and weaknesses. They represent forces of nature, aspects of human experience, and models, both positive and negative, for human behavior. Your relationship with these deities is transactional rather than devotional in the modern sense. You make offerings, perhaps a portion of food placed in the fire or a drop of drink poured onto the earth, with the expectation of favors or protection in return. The gods are powerful allies to be respected and propitiated, not abstract, moral judges of your behavior. Comment below if you think you'd prefer the Norse approach to religion. Less about abstract sin and more about practical relationships with forces greater than yourself. Just don't expect those relationships to be comfortable or easy. Christianity is making inroads in Norse territories during this period, but the conversion is gradual and syncretic. Many people incorporate elements of Christian practice into traditional beliefs rather than making a clean break. You might wear both Thor's hammer and a cross, covering your spiritual bases rather than making an exclusive choice. As the meal concludes and the stories wind down, the final tasks of the day must be completed before sleep. Animals need a final check and feeding. The fire must be properly banked to last through the night, not just for warmth, but for the practical need to preserve embers for morning's fire starting. Water might be brought in and placed near the hearth so it won't freeze overnight. Preparations for the next day might be discussed and assigned. If tomorrow is washing day, water vessels might be positioned. If bread baking is planned, flour might be measured out and starter prepared. In a world without refrigeration, electric light, or running water, advanced planning is essential for efficiency. That's sound, the careful arrangement of coals and ash to preserve the fire's heart. Throughout the night represents one of the most critical skills in your Viking existence. Fire is life, especially in winter, and the ability to maintain it through the night without constant attention is fundamental to survival. As the evening progresses, the home grows quieter. Oil lamps are extinguished to conserve precious fuel, leaving only the red glow of the banked hearth providing minimal light. Family members begin to prepare for sleep, but not in the way modern people do. There's no bathroom to visit for teeth brushing and face washing. You might rinse your mouth with water and run wet fingers over your face, but that's the extent of evening hygiene. There's no changing into special sleep clothes. You simply remove your outer garments and perhaps your shoes, sleeping in much the same clothing you've worn all day. The sleeping arrangements are communal and practical. The entire family, parents, children, perhaps elderly relatives or even servants in wealthier households, sleep in close proximity for warmth. Privacy as modern people understand it is virtually non-existent. Sexual relations between partners happen in this shared space, with the only concession to privacy being the cover of darkness and perhaps a cloak or blanket. Before fully settling in for the night, there might be one more important activity, especially during the long winter evenings when darkness falls early but sleep might not come immediately. This is the practice of handcraft by firelight, activities that can be done with minimal vision and maximum efficiency. Women might continue spinning thread using drop spindles, a task that skilled hands can perform nearly automatically, creating valuable thread even in near darkness. Men might carve small wooden items or repair leather goods by feel as much as sight. These activities combine productivity with a meditative quality that helps transition the busy mind towards sleep. That gentle sound, the rhythmic spinning of wool into thread, might be the last thing you hear before sleep claims you. It's the sound of creativity and necessity intertwined, of hands continuing the work of survival even as the body rests. As family members gradually succumb to exhaustion, they settle onto their sleeping benches or platforms. Blankets of wool and furs are pulled tight against the cold that seeps through walls and under doors despite all efforts at insulation. Bodies huddle close for warmth, breath clouding in the frigid air, even indoors. There is no concept of sleeping in, awaiting you in the morning. Dawn, if it can even be called that during the brief winter days, will bring an immediate return to the work of survival. But for now, sleep provides necessary recovery for bodies pushed to their limits by constant physical labor and environmental stress. In the darkness, as consciousness fades, you might offer one last prayer to the gods, or to the Christian deity who is slowly gaining influence in Norse lands. You might ask for protection through the vulnerable hours of sleep, for good weather tomorrow, for the health of your family and livestock. These are not abstract spiritual concerns, but practical requests directly tied to survival. Your dreams, when they come, are likely vivid and often troubling, influenced by the Norse belief that dreams can be prophetic or can represent visitation from supernatural beings. A particularly intense dream might be discussed the next day, with older family members offering interpretations based on traditional understanding of dream symbolism. And so ends your day as an ordinary Norse person in the Viking Age, not with glorious battle or mead hall feasting, but with the quiet rhythms of everyday survival. Every action from dawn to dusk has been focused on maintaining life in a harsh environment with limited technology. Every skill you possess has been earned through practice and necessity. Every object you own serves a practical purpose. This is the reality behind the romanticized image of the Vikings. A life of constant work, physical hardship, and practical ingenuity. A life where comfort is rare, where pain is expected, where death is an everyday companion, but also a life rich in community bonds, skilled craftsmanship, and deep connection to natural cycles that modern people have largely forgotten. Part 7, The Other Season. We've followed you through a winter day as an average Norse person, but the Viking year had its own rhythm dictated by seasons. Let's briefly explore how your life would differ during other parts of the year. Spring in the Norse lands isn't the gentle, flower-filled season of temperate regions. It's a muddy, uncertain time of thaw and preparation. The snow and ice begin to recede, but the ground remains frozen below the surface, creating a waterlogged landscape where every step might sink ankle-deep into mud. This is when the most intense agricultural work begins. Fields must be prepared and crops sown as soon as the ground can be worked. Every able-bodied person is needed for this critical task, as the short growing season of northern latitudes leaves little margin for error. Ploughing is done with simple wooden ploughs, perhaps with iron cutting edges if you're fortunate, pulled by oxen or horses. The work is back-breaking, with the plough operator fighting to keep the implement cutting properly through soil still partially frozen and often root-bound. Spring is also the birthing season for livestock, a time of constant vigilance and often heartbreak. Newborn animals require protection from both weather and predators. Many won't survive, and each loss represents a significant blow to your household economy. The successful births, however, bring welcome additions to herds and flocks that were culled in the fall to conserve winter fodder. For coastal communities, spring marks the beginning of the raiding season, not because Norse people had a cultural calendar marked start raiding now, but because the seas become navigable after winter storms. If you're one of the relatively few Norse people who actually participates in raids, this is when preparations intensify. Ships are made ready, provisions gathered, weapons checked and repaired. The majority of Norse people, however, never went raiding. They remained at home, focused on the agricultural and craft work that formed the true economic backbone of Norse society. The glamorous image of Vikings as primarily warriors and explorers is largely a misconception. Most were farmers who occasionally fought, not warriors who occasionally farmed. Spring also brings religious observances, perhaps sacrifices for fertility and good crops, rituals to honor the gods and secure their favor for the critical growing season ahead. These aren't abstract worship services, but practical ceremonies with clear purpose, to ensure survival through successful harvests and healthy livestock. Summer brings the precious gift of extended daylight. In the far northern regions, the sun barely sets at all during midsummer. This is a time of nearly constant work, with every moment of light used for productive activity. The agricultural calendar dominates life during the brief northern summer. There's weeding and tending of crops, hay, harvesting for winter, animal fodder, gathering of herbs and berries from wild sources, hunting, fishing, and maintenance of structures while weather permits outdoor work. That sound, the regular swoosh of a scythe cutting through grass, might continue from dawn until dusk during high summer. Hay is literally life stored as food energy, the means by which your animals, and thus you, will survive the winter. A poor hay harvest can force difficult decisions about which animals to slaughter in fall, because they cannot be fed through winter. Summer is also the time for construction and major repairs. Buildings deteriorate during the harsh winter months, and the brief good weather allows for necessary maintenance. A roof that begins leaking in October might mean death by exposure before spring arrives. Social activities increase in summer as travel becomes easier. Local markets or things, assemblies, might be held, allowing for trade, legal proceedings, marriage arrangements, and the exchange of news and information. These gatherings serve multiple purposes: economic, judicial, social, and informational, and might be among the few times you encounter large groups of people from outside your immediate community. Midsummer celebrations, particularly the Feast of Midsummer Night, provide a rare opportunity for festivity and slightly increased leisure. There might be bonfires, feasting, though still modest by modern standards, games of strength and skill, and perhaps courtship activities for unmarried young people. But even during these celebrations, work doesn't cease entirely. The growing season is too short and too precious to waste even a single day of good weather and extended light. As summer wanes and autumn approaches, work intensifies further with the critical harvest period. This is when the results of the year's agricultural labor are finally collected. The crops that will determine whether the coming winter brings mere hardship or actual starvation. Grain crops must be harvested at precisely the right time Too early and the yield is reduced. Too late and wet weather might ruin the entire crop. Once cut, grain must be processed quickly, bound into sheaves, dried, threshed to separate kernels from stalks, winnowed to remove chaff, and finally stored in rodent-proof containers. Each step is labor-intensive and time-sensitive, the relentless rhythm of flails striking grain. That's the sound of security being literally beaten out of the harvest. Every kernel matters, every lost grain represents future hunger. Children as young as 5 or 6 participate in gleaning, collecting individual fallen grains from the field after the main harvest. Nothing is wasted because nothing can be afforded to be wasted. Autumn is also slaughtering time for livestock that cannot be maintained through winter. This isn't casual butchery, but a complex process of resource maximal extraction. Every part of the animal is used, meat preserved, by smoking, drying or salting, blood collected for sausages and food products, internal organs consumed quickly or preserved, bones processed for tools and crafts, hides prepared for leather, fat rendered for lighting, cooking and weatherproofing. That metallic scraping isn't just knife maintenance, it's preparation for the ancient rite of transforming life into sustenance. Slaughtering day is solemn, practical, and absolutely essential. There's no sentimentality about it. Animals raised for food meet their intended purpose. But there is respect for the sacrifice that makes human survival possible. Autumn sees intensive food preservation of all kinds. Fruits and berries are dried or preserved with honey, if available. Nuts are collected and stored. Herbs are dried for both culinary and medicinal purposes. Root vegetables are prepared for storage in cool, dry locations or perhaps in sand to prevent rotting. This is also when brewing and fermentation activities peak. Ale is produced from grain, and the last berries of the season might be fermented into fruit wines. These alcoholic beverages aren't primarily recreational, but caloric, providing both nutrition and safe hydration during winter months when water sources might be contaminated or frozen. As the days grow noticeably shorter, indoor work begins to take precedence again. Textile production intensifies with the processing of newly harvested flax and newly shorn wool. Woodworking projects that were postponed during the busy growing season are taken up again. The cycle of the year begins to turn toward the winter, conditions where we first joined your Viking life. Part 8. The cycle of life. Beyond the cycle of seasons, your life as an ordinary Norse person is shaped by the greater cycle of human existence: birth, childhood, adulthood, aging, and death. Let's examine how these universal experiences differ in your Viking Age reality. Birth in the Viking Age is simultaneously ordinary and extraordinarily dangerous. There are no hospitals, no obstetricians, no fetal monitoring or ultrasounds. Women give birth at home, attended by experienced women from the community. Mothers, grandmothers, specialized midwives if the community has them. That sound, a woman bringing new life into the world through pain and determination, has remained essentially unchanged throughout human history. What has changed dramatically is the risk involved. In the Viking Age, approximately 1 in 5 women will eventually die from pregnancy-related causes. Each birth is a journey to the threshold between worlds, and not every woman returns. The birthing room is a female space, with men generally excluded unless there's no alternative. Practical knowledge of childbirth is passed from woman to woman through direct experience rather than formal training. Some midwives might have specialized herbal knowledge to ease pain or prevent infection, but their primary tools are experience and patience. Once born, a baby faces immediate life-threatening challenges: infection, congenital issues, and simple, Lack of adequate nutrition will contribute to an infant mortality rate of approximately 30% in the first year of life. This stark reality shapes family planning, emotional bonds, and even naming practices. The naming of a child often doesn't happen immediately after birth, but is delayed until the infant has demonstrated some likelihood of survival. Perhaps after 9 days, which might be marked with a ceremony called a Nafen Festi, name fastening. Until this point, the emotional investment in the newborn might be somewhat guarded, a psychological defense mechanism against the common tragedy of infant death. If the child survives, they enter a world that has no concept of childhood as a protected state of play and development. From the earliest age, children are incorporated into the household labor system according to their capabilities. A toddler might be given simple tasks like carrying small items or shooing away chickens. By age 5 or 6, children have real responsibilities contributing to family survival. The education of children in the Viking Age is entirely practical and hands-on. There are no schools, no standardized curriculum, no concept of universal literacy. Children learn by doing, by watching their parents and other adults, by making mistakes and being corrected. Boys typically learn the skills of their fathers or male relatives, farming techniques, hunting, fishing, woodworking, or perhaps specialized crafts if the family has a particular tradition. Girls learn from their mothers and other female relatives, textile production, food preservation, dairy processing, child rearing, and medicinal herb knowledge. This gendered division of labor isn't absolute. Practical necessity often requires flexibility, but it forms the basic structure of skill transmission across generations. By the age of 12 to 14, most children are capable of performing nearly all the adult tasks appropriate to their gender, though perhaps with less strength or speed than fully grown adults. That exchange, a child learning through direct instruction from an adult, is the true education system of the Viking Age. No classrooms, no textbooks, no arbitrary subjects disconnected from immediate survival needs. Every lesson has direct practical application, and the measure of educational success is simple. Can the child now perform the task independently? Play does exist for children, but it's limited by both time constraints and practical considerations. Children's games often mimic adult activities, mock battles for boys, imitation household tasks for girls, providing entertainment while simultaneously developing needed skills. Toys are simple and often handmade. Wooden animals, cloth, dolls, miniature weapons or tools. The concept of adolescence as an extended period of identity formation doesn't exist. Children transition to adult status through demonstrated capability and community recognition rather than reaching an arbitrary age. A girl who can manage household tasks might be considered marriageable by 14-16. A boy who can perform a man's work in the fields or at a craft might be considered adult by similar ages. Adulthood in the Viking Age is defined primarily by productive capacity and social role, rather than chronological age. Once recognized as an adult, you're expected to contribute fully to family and community survival. Marriage is primarily an economic and social arrangement rather than a romantic one, though personal preference isn't entirely ignored when practical. Marriages create alliances between families, combine resources, and establish the foundation for new households and legitimate children. The Norse marriage process is surprisingly contractual and property-focused. Negotiations between families establish the mundur, bride price paid by the groom's family, and hymen fylgja, dowry, from the bride's family. These aren't symbolic payments but substantial transfers of wealth that help establish the new household and protect the woman's interests. That sound, men negotiating marriage terms, represents the business aspect of Viking Age matrimony. Marriage is too important for community survival to be left entirely to personal preference and romantic feelings. That said, There is evidence that women had more say in marriage choices than in many contemporary cultures, with Norse law recognizing their right to divorce and to control their own property within marriage. Once married, a couple is expected to establish a productive household unit and produce children, preferably many, given the high mortality rates. Romantic love might develop, but the partnership is fundamentally pragmatic, with clear division of authority and responsibility. The husband typically has legal authority and represents the family publicly, while the wife controls the internal household economy, a separate but essential sphere of power. Sexual fidelity expectations appear to have been somewhat asymmetrical, with women held to stricter standards than men. However, Norse women had legal recourse against mistreatment and could initiate divorce for causes including physical abuse, financial mismanagement, or the husband's extended absence. These rights were relatively progressive for the era and reflect the practical value placed on women's contributions to household survival. Aging in the Viking Age comes earlier and harder than in modern times. By 30, your body likely shows significant wear from constant physical labor and environmental stress. By 40, you might be considered elderly. By 50, you've outlived many of your contemporaries and are approaching the outer limits of typical life expectancy. The concept of retirement doesn't exist. You work as long as you're physically capable, gradually shifting to less demanding tasks as strength and stamina diminish. Elderly members of the household might focus on indoor crafts, childcare, food preparation, or advisory roles where their accumulated knowledge remains valuable even as their physical capabilities decline. That voice, aged but respected, represents one of the most valuable resources in a pre-literate society: living memory and accumulated wisdom. The elderly are knowledge repositories who remember past weather patterns, successful agricultural techniques, traditional remedies, and family histories. Their value doesn't end when their physical strength wanes. Death, when it comes, is acknowledged as an inevitable part of life rather than a failure of medical intervention. Norse cosmology has well-developed concepts of the afterlife, though these vary by region and gradually change with Christianization. Traditional belief holds that warriors who die in battle might go to Valhalla or Folkvanga, while others go to Hell, a place not necessarily unpleasant, ruled by the goddess of the same name, or to other realms associated with specific deities. Funeral practices vary by region and status. Cremation and inhumation burial both occur, sometimes with grave goods intended to serve the deceased in the afterlife. Ship burials are reserved for the highest status individuals, not ordinary people. Most common folk receive simple funerals with minimal material expenditure. Resources are too precious to bury extensively with the dead when the living need them for survival. That sound, the cremation fire and mourning voices, represents the final transition in your Viking Age existence. Your body returns to the elements, your possessions are largely redistributed among the living, and your memory lives on through your descendants and your contributions to community survival. Death isn't hidden away or denied, but incorporated into the community's understanding of life's natural cycle. Children witness death of animals and humans from their earliest years. This creates a relationship with mortality that's both more immediate and perhaps more accepting than modern attitudes. And so we complete our journey through the daily life of an ordinary Norse person during the Viking Age. Not the glamorous warrior of popular imagination, but the farmer, craftsperson, parent, and community member whose labor and endurance formed the true foundation of Norse society. The reality we've explored is simultaneously harsher and richer than popular portrayals suggest. Harsher in its physical demands, constant labor, and omnipresent threats to survival. Richer in its community interdependence, practical skills, and direct connection to the natural world that sustained and threatened in equal measure. If there's one thing to take from this immersion into your Viking ancestors' daily reality, it's this: survival was never taken for granted. Every meal represented hours of labor. Every garment embodied weeks of work from field to body. Every tool required skilled hands and precious resources. Every day demanded constant effort just to maintain life's basic necessities.